Yeah, so thanks a lot for joining us, Ethan. I think defense tech is one of those really hot sectors right now. So I'm glad we could have someone, you know, a very interesting example from that field. I guess the facts kind of speak for themselves. You were Sequoia's first defense tech investment. Um, I guess you started raising at 19, but it might have been earlier. You're 21 now. And, as Connie mentioned, you built this company starting in college. But apparently, as I've been reading, you've always been building weapons, even in as a child, maybe. So I guess I wanted to. This is what I've read, and I think it's true that the first, weapon you built was basically something your parents funded, and it was some kind of $500 machine. I'm just very curious about like why, what was this, and what drove you as a kid to just be so interested in actually building these things. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, first off, I'd say I've built a lot of things, not just weapons.
Okay.
So it comes from just I love making things. So furniture, kitchen
Great.
knives, all kinds of different stuff. But yeah, the impetus for all of this is I am very worried about sort of the U.S.'s position in future conflict, and really really passionate about making sure we have access to the best technology. And so yeah, when I was sometime in high school, my parents gave me some money, and I went and made it was like a bazooka thing. So it was deer feeder batteries, and then it made hydrogen, and then shot like ball bearings. It's like a shoulder mounted cannon thing. Yeah, I don't know.
I think a lot of, maybe boys that age are interested in the military. Like probably I was as well as a nerd, but I wasn't building actual. So it's impressive. I think so how did Mach start then in college? Because that's when it became like more serious, and that's the origin of your current company, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually raised our first capital in high school, just like a couple $1,000s from 15, 17. So I worked as an auto tech in high school and used that to save money, and then started making kitchen knives, making furniture, just kind of making stuff to bootstrap Mach while I was in high school. And that's when I started prototyping and sort of designing a lot of this stuff. And then, yeah, I didn't know what VC was. And so it was like very challenging to bootstrap something like Mach. And then, yeah, I went to MIT and pretty quickly was super fortunate to meet a bunch of VCs.
I see. And so basically you dropped out of MIT, right?
I did.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so what led you to that decision? Was there concern from your family and friends about that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was planning on actually serving in the Air Force. So I was actually on scholarship to do that. And that had kind of been my plan because I frankly, at the time, even when I dropped out, I didn't think Mach would work. And so I always knew it was high risk as like an 18-year-old to try and build a business like this was low probability. But yeah, my freshman semester just started getting very, very concerned about sort of geopolitical positioning, watching stuff happening in Ukraine, the fact that no U.S. companies are having really any military relevance on the unmanned system side there, as China's sort of fueling both sides of the war and operating their systems on both sides. So realized that if I had gone and done that and started Mach 8 years later, it might have been sort of too late to make an impact, and just dropped out. No money, no team. It was low probability of working at the time, but I just wanted to do it.
Wow. And so basically, I did read that you built a weapon in college too. And so what was that one, and how did that help you raise, or was that just some kind of prototype, basically?
It was a prototype. So yeah, while I was in college, I actually got the university to agree to sort of help me research stuff, and so did that. They kicked me off campus to do the work, and then sent me over to this group called Lincoln Labs, and then found out Lincoln Labs was going to take my IP, and so my buddies and I got together and ended up just machining it on stuff around campus. This was a hydrogen powered cannon that we built at the time, but then we're building drones and all kinds of different stuff.
I see. Okay, great. And so how do you go from that, basically to raising from Sequoia and these kind of like brand name VCs?
Yeah, it's a good question. Building a lot of prototypes, right? So proving that we were in a position to actually make the tech work, and then hired out our sort of go-to-market team on the gov side. I think that's always been the big question. Is not necessarily my ability to build these things, but more so our ability to actually work with the federal government to get programs of record built around them. And so building out that team, winning a few super early contracts.
Great. And I know like at the origin too, there was a big focus on like hydrogen,
Yep.
right? And is there still a focus on hydrogen, or what happened to the hydrogen angle, basically?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So essentially, our goal as a company has always been to provide that offset to China, and especially in light of sort of the future of unmanned warfare. So as we look at a lot of these assets, Mach's actually building things today that you can launch anywhere and for tens of thousands of dollars take out a target anywhere on Earth, right? And so one has to imagine a world where China has access to that same technology. And in that world, centralized assets are very difficult to defend. Sort of most acute of this is your energy supply chain. And so I was really passionate early on about being able to field source combustion fuel. Because in a world where your refineries are being blown up, in a world where oil tankers are being blown up, the ability to actually field source the fuel you use to launch projectiles, to power systems is really, really important. It was a miscalculation on my end in that the products we build have to win wars on a 2-decade timeline, but also increase sort of military readiness on a 1-year timeline. And the thing about the field source fuel is actually worse than what we have today. And so it's very difficult to convince the DoD essentially towards this future world, in a world where we can still, for the moment, ship gas across the ocean. And so we've focused more in the near term on the actual platforms and manufacturing end, actually selling all up capabilities. And also think hydrogen is probably a bad tech bet. I think the field source combustion fuel will be more methane or something else. But yeah, we'll still totally do that work as a company. I still think having field source combustion fuel is existentially important for that future world. But we had to generate revenue elsewhere in the meantime.
I see. Okay, great. And then like, I know, you definitely have impressive achievements and stuff, but building a defense tech company is not easy. I mean, building any startup is difficult, but defense tech especially, since you're dealing with, explosive weapons and things like that. And I think it was reported like in one of the early trials of the hydrogen weapons, like one of your staff was injured by an explosion, basically. So I'm just curious, like how has your approach to safety evolved? Like, how are you taking that into consideration now? Because I mean, you're still building basically, and these weapons are pretty dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the reasons we've pushed to capitalize the business so well. So that did happen. It happened while we were basically in college. And so at the time we were trying to self-fund it and we didn't have the money to sort of run these procedures the way they should have been. And so yeah, after that happened, essentially shut down all work until we raised the fund from Sequoia because it was really just a lack of resources. And now obviously we have the resource to actually have a full safety team. We're in sort of in deep partnership with the Army to actually develop the munitions we're testing now. And so a lot about defense is actually capitalizing your business correctly such that you can build these frameworks and sort of have the appropriate level of respect and safety for what you're doing.
Great. And yeah, so I'm curious now, like, TechCrunch, we just reported that, you've won a U.S. military contract. How did that come about, and what exactly is that you're, providing to the U.S. basically?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for reporting that. So yeah, the capability we're providing with that contract, it's essentially like a miniature fighter jet that you and I could launch. So the Army contract is to develop, sort of kinetically test this thing, and the actual capability is for 2 users to be able to put up an aircraft that goes up to about 40,000 feet and then delivers a payload a couple hundred miles downrange. We're really excited about this capability because it helps increase sort of warfighter survivability. A lot of the more centralized platforms we're deploying now in future conflicts are actually pretty easy to back target against. And so our goal with this contract is to take that same capability, but then make it something that 2 people can launch so they can sort of shoot, move. And so that's a path for us. We also announced sort of the factory we're building that in. We'll be able to produce about 1,000 a month in that factory, and really excited to provide that capability.
Great. And I'm curious about, just the fundraising side as well. Like, how has it been? You're 21 now. You started fundraising even earlier. Like, has that been a help or a hindrance? Or I know some VCs actually might prefer that. Do you feel like as you're getting older, you might be it might be harder to raise? I mean, like, how does that basically like? I'm just curious because there have been a few founders that are like really young, and like some of them say, VC, just like, is it a challenge or a boost or both, basically?
I don't think about it a ton. I think with certain folks it's probably a boost, and with other folks certainly a challenge. Yeah, look, we haven't had any issues fundraising. I think that's one thing we've done relatively well. But yeah, it all comes back to how well you do at actually building the company, and I think we're doing well there. And so,
Do you think VCs like are still, I mean, it is a hot field, defense tech, but like, do you think there is still some reluctance or difficulty getting funding as a defense tech startup? It's still a little bit abnormal, or do you think that that era is completely over? It's now like easy as anything.
I think it's definitely not easy. I'd say it's the appropriate level of difficulty, right? Like these are very capital intensive businesses. Mach, as we build it, will end up deploying billions of dollars of capital around scaling manufacturing and building the rest of the platforms we need to build for the country. And so it's difficult in that you just have to raise a lot of capital. But also think VC, and I can even feel it over the last 3 years, has woken up to the true need, which is really twofold, right? Like I think people mostly see it in light of near peer competition with China, and in which defense funding is obviously crucial. I mean, we lose every war game we run. Like the US DoD loses its own war games to China, which is pretty existentially terrifying. And then the second and by far more important thing is the role of autonomy. Like this is the first time in human history where weapons can actually control themselves in a fight. And that creates changes from the platform all the way down to the energy and manufacturing, which is actually where we spend most of our time. And so I think the second is definitely a lot more important, and it's also going to take, I think, a lot longer to play out than people realize. Like this change from manned systems to unmanned systems will likely take 2 to 3 decades, and so I think most of the value is to be built. We're just starting to scratch the surface, but it's in light of the first problem, in light of near peer conflict, it's absolutely crucial that we get this change in tech right.
Okay, great. And I'm curious then, like, do you think a drone or some other kind of weapon should be able to like take out an enemy autonomously? I mean, that means without a human in the loop. Basically, there's a lot of talk now in defense tech about swarms and things like that. Do you think there should always be a human in the loop, or are there situations where just to maximize effectiveness, you got to take that human out, basically?
Yeah, this is a really, really hard question. And first thing I'll say is I will never be in a position to dictate that, right? Which I think is a very, very good thing. So it's the policymakers, it's the government decides that ultimately. I will say there are sort of two different types of autonomy. There's vehicle level autonomy, which is essentially visual based navigation, visual based targeting. If you've already sent the thing off of the chain, how are you making it hit as accurately as possible? And then you have kind of the fleet level autonomy, which is a lot more complicated. That's if I'm managing 1,000 vehicles and they're fighting your 1,000 vehicles, what are they choosing to target? I would say the adversary will be deploying both in short order. And so the scary world is one where we actually have to do this to even maintain relevance. I would say, I think we need to improve, right? Like right now, if you're firing something in Ukraine and it's being jammed on GPS, you've got a 500-pound bomb hitting somewhere within like a mile, and that is like the worst case scenario. And so it's our role as sort of people building this technology to make it as precise as possible, to avoid as much collateral as possible. And unfortunately, in sort of modern combat environments, GPS, communications, all the things we rely on to keep humans in the loop no longer work. Like they're just not working in Ukraine. And so it's a huge issue. One I fortunately will never be in a position of sort of deciding on. My job is to be ready to support the US military in whatever sort of path they choose to take to maintain sort of defense for the country. I would say on the vehicle level autonomy, I'm actually an advocate of that, and I will say that. This is if a human has already decided to sort of let something off the chain, you have full obligation to make sure that thing is going to be as precise as it possibly can be. I would say I'm not an advocate of sort of fleet level autonomy, right? If you're managing 1,000 vehicles that are letting themselves off the chain, that becomes a lot more complex.
Okay, interesting. And yeah, I'm curious too. I mean, you've mentioned geopolitics, you mentioned China. Like, I read somewhere that your startup, I don't know if it still does this, but had like a Taiwan invasion countdown. Do you think they're going to do it? Is China going to invade Taiwan? And like, is that the kind of thing that are defense tech companies building towards that scenario, basically?
Yeah, I mean, we have to be, right? Like, that's my job. That's why I started the company. I think China has published a date of military readiness for Taiwan. And so if the U.S. is not ready by that date, we're in a very bad position. And so I actually can't speak to whether or not they do. I have no idea. I don't think any of us do. But as someone building in the space in a world where China has published a date to have military readiness to invade Taiwan, we certainly need to be in a position to deter that conflict. And if we fail at deterring it, which is ultimately the goal, you don't want the conflict to happen, right? In founding Mach, my goal was to have such proliferated sort of defense systems that an invasion isn't possible and never happens. And so that's the goal. If we succeed, an invasion doesn't happen. If an invasion does happen, you have to be in a position to win it. But unfortunately, right now, the U.S. is not in a position to win it. Right? That's sort of what I said about the war games we run. We lose every single one.
Okay, great. And I'm curious too about the question of like battle testedness. This is something in defense tech investing I've seen pop up occasionally. Is like a lot of these companies are building impressive products, but I think relatively few have been actually tested in the battlefield so far. I think there might be one or two, but for the most part, these kind of weapons are still at the testing stage and haven't really been used in a real war. So like, are you basically what's your take on that? Like some of the people who are saying, well, this stuff is it's just a prototype, stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's crucial. I mean, the tough part there is U.S. sort of export rules. So we've been working through the U.S. export process for about the last year now. We recently got TAA approval to export, which is sort of the major step in doing that. I can say I've been to Ukraine. We actually hire Ukrainians to be as close to sort of the tech that's working as possible. And so we spend a lot of time on the ground there, just making sure we're as in tune as possible. And then as soon as sort of the federal government allows export, we'll be over there. But yeah, it's absolutely crucial, right? Like we're seeing the first post-unmanned war happening in Ukraine, and the fact that U.S. tech is failing in that war, right? They pulled our Abrams off the line. Really, no U.S. company has had any relevance. That should alarm us, right? It used to be that American defense tech was the best, right? If you had $100,000 to spend on anything, you'd spend it on American gear. And right now, the fact that the Ukrainians are in a position to do that and are actually mostly buying Chinese drones should be very alarming to us.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I'm curious too because like you have a new strategy now that I think TechCrunch was also the first to report, which is like this new decentralized factories basically, and like I assume this is also part of a move to reshore manufacturing to the U.S. and like I'm just curious like how difficult is it to build a deep tech defense tech startup without using Chinese components? I mean that is kind of the norm in manufacturing.
Very, very challenging. I'd say, yeah. So we announced Forge. Forge is essentially we're partnering with other companies actually to build their products for them. The decentralized portion is very, very important there because sort of, and we see this in Ukraine. If your factories are very centralized in this future world where offensive strikes are so easy, you're in a very, very risky spot. And so, yeah, we're having to vertically integrate a ton. I mean, we're having to build our own jet engines, our own avionics, our own radios, our own radar. These supply chains don't exist, and it's pretty existentially important that we get these built. And this is really Forge for us. It's almost a consortium of different companies that are paying us to help them sort of reach this scale.
I see. And like, how do you figure out if someone isn't, or if a piece of equipment isn't from China? Basically, is it like
you just
have to,
we have a big supply chain team that's constantly flying to visit vendors. We're constantly sort of assessing. It's really difficult, but it's an important part of building in this.
Okay, great. I think this is great so far. I think just to wrap up, I'm curious about basically like the biggest trends in defense tech right now. Like what I think if I understand correctly, your current products are like a cruise missile sort of device, and then another kind of device called Glide, which is positioned at the edge of space that can be used to target any target on Earth, basically. Is this where you see it headed?
I think so, yeah. I mean, the big trends, the first that we're not playing in is sort of battlefield orchestration software. The second is mass proliferated sort of long-range fires. This is where Mach is probably one of the leaders right now.
What does that mean, long-range fires? Like artillery?
It means hypersonics, stratospheric sort of munitions like we're building, cruise missiles. Essentially, we need to have enough sort of capability to deter wars. And so essentially just precision mass. And then the next is probably decentralized energy, decentralized manufacturing, decentralized sort of logistics, all the things that it takes to actually fight a war when the first two exist. I think those are probably the three biggest trends.
Great. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Ethan. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.